it was my favorite. It was my favorite night in WCW as well. It was just such a visceral match, and the handcuffs were off all of us. And we had that side story of Sting and Nikita Koloff, and was Nikita Koloff going to turn on Sting? And Nikita had just come back, and he had a point to prove. He wanted to really show people that he could go. And Nikita was one of the great talents that never really got a chance to show everybody just how talented he truly was. Sting was really on top of his game at the time, and so was everybody else inside. Ricky Steamboat, who just, my God, the matches that he had with Steve Austin in 1991 and 1992 changed Steve Austin as a performer and helped make Steve Austin as a performer and helped make Steve understand the flow and the trajectory of a match. And then you had Rick Rude. And Rick Rude was so on top of his game. I respect everything that Rick Rude did in WWF, which is now WWE, but I would dare suggest that from the time he came to WCW, that first year that he had inside the company was the single best Rick Rude that we were ever offered. So here you had Sting and Steamboat and Nikita and Barry Windham and I believe it was Dustin as well, very, very young Dustin Rhodes, who really at the time was given a chance now to take that character and see how far he could be the next great worker in the business. And look who we had on our side. Rick Rude as the main guy. Supporting player, imagine this, a supporting player named Steve Austin. Bobby Eaton, one of the true great unheralded workers in the history of our industry. Larry Zbyszko, and by the way, Arn Anderson as backup, just in case it wasn't going great. Hey Arn, what do we do? I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll put me in the ring, we'll do just fine. I had the best seat in the house for the best match in the history of WCW, especially in that era, with 10 of the best performers of that era in that time, at their height, on top of their game, all with something to prove on a night that they all wanted to prove it. And yes, sir, I agree with you. That was the finest WCW match and the most realistic that I had ever seen in my life.
With WCW in the early 90s, you were a big part of that, obviously, but then you left to go to ECW. What do you think was the reason that WCW in the early 90s, what were the prime reasons that they weren't competing with WWF? Like, what were the reasons that they just weren't as sort of relevant at the time? Because management had absolutely no product knowledge. They brought in a bunch of people from the outside who thought that this could be run in the manner of dollars and cents up front, and that's just not the way this business runs. It's just not. It never will be. It's always going to be about developing young talent, moving new people into the main event mix, getting those people who are in the main event mix to be accepted by the public as main eventers, and then as soon as someone's accepted as a main eventer, already have the next wave of main eventers being moved up so that you have established star A, established star B, going against new star A and new star B, while new star A and new star B are getting ready to work with newer star A and newer star B. And those newer guys are gonna work with the older guys too. And now, instead of having two main eventers, and two new main eventers, and two new main eventers, you have 6 main eventers. Wow, we did that on SmackDown, didn't we? This very concept. And I didn't prepare that. I just realized what I was doing. Holy shit, that's what I did on SmackDown. And now you have 6 main eventers, and guess what happens when you have 6 main eventers? You have 6 people that can now work with other people and make them main eventers as well. And that's how this business needs to operate and always has. And unless someone comes up with something different, it's always going to be that way. So the people that were put in charge just didn't understand that, had no concept of what draws, how to get people to draw, and then once someone's drawing, how to keep them hot while making someone else hot. And by the way, if you have two people are hot, match them against each other. That's what the people want to see. And they didn't get it. They just didn't understand. And I can't sit here and tell you that they're stupid people or they're ignorant or whatever. They were ignorant towards the industry of sports entertainment / professional wrestling and had no business being in this business. And so it inherently, no matter how great of a roster, I mean, again, look at the roster that we were just talking about. Rick Rude, Steve Austin, Larry Zbyszko, Arn Anderson, Bobby Eaton, Medusa, climbing long before, and God bless Mick Foley, but long before Mick Foley thought of going on top of the cell with The Undertaker, Medusa went on top of the War Games with Sting. And here's Medusa in high heels, by the way. Think about that. Think about that. In high heels, she climbed to the top of the cage and stood there. And man, I tell you what, I admittedly, you know, we all know what we're talking about here. I knew what was going to happen. I thought Sting was going to get his ass whipped. Because Deuce was no one to mess with, and especially back in 1992. She had just come in from Japan. She had done all this kickboxing, and she had done shoot matches with Aja Kong, and she had trained in Thailand. And Sting's like going on top of the cage to beat his chest like King Kong. And Deuce looks at me and goes, "I'm going to go up there." I was like, "What?" And she's like, "I'm going to go up there." Why? I don't know. I'll figure it out when I get up there. And I'm like, no. She's up there. And I love telling Rick Rude stories because Rick Rude was one of the coolest dudes I ever met in my entire life. He was just so cool. I mean, Rick Rude used to talk like this. He'd always shake his head when he's talking to you, and everything that came out of his mouth sounded like he was just a really tough guy saying something really cool. Because, by the way, he was a really tough guy saying something really cool. And Rude goes, "Hey, Paulie, what the is Deuce doing on top of the Hell in a Cell?" Not Hell in a Cell, and on top of the War Games. I said, "Rick, I don't know what she's doing on top of the War Games." And he goes, "Neither do I, but it's going to be interesting to watch." And of course, just being Rick Rude, he's going like this. And she's wearing this long gown, this long, beautiful, you know where this is going, right? This long gown. And I go, "What are you doing?" He goes, "Trying to see if she has any panties on." So we go from the question about WCW management to whether Medusa did or did not wear panties back in 1992, and even if she does now, which I don't know, and I don't have the balls to ask. But here's the point. 10 great talents, plus Medusa, plus a manager who kind of knew what he was doing on the outside, plus Jim Ross on commentary, plus Tony Schiavone, who everybody knocks, but he wasn't all that bad to begin with, okay? All these talents, all these people, great referees, great announcers, everybody together, and didn't know how to draw money. Why? Because they were the wrong people in management. They didn't know how to market it. They didn't know how to put people together. That War Games came together because we pushed for it to come together, because we kept saying, "Look at all this talent, look at all these feuds that we're doing. Why don't we all just do a War Games?" And finally, we just pushed and pushed and pushed, and they didn't have a theme for that show. And Steve Chamberlain, who was a TBS executive, said, "Why don't we do War Games?" So now they had to fill the War Games with something, which is why they kind of lucked into that match. And that was the point. Anything good that happened back then, they lucked into.
And I never knew this before this tour, but when you left WCW in 1992, I think it was, you almost went to the WWF. There was an opportunity for you to go to the WWF, which, talk about what the opportunity was and why ultimately you didn't decide to do it.
My contract was coming due in the early part of 1992 with WCW, and the concept, and then again, I made my mark in WCW because I came in as Paulie Dangerously. I smacked Jim Cornette in the face with a telephone. He bled on television, and I know Bill Watts had smacked him in the head a couple times and made him bleed in Louisiana, but nobody had ever seen Jim Cornette bleed before, and I mean he bled on television, and we got a very quick reputation for that. And here was Jim Cornette, who was at the time just the top heel manager in the business, and I turned him babyface. And so the concept was to kind of do the same thing in WWF, which is now WWE, in that Bobby Heenan was picking his spot to get out of managing and was going to move on to be a commentator, but he had about 2 years to go. So the concept was for me to come in as Bobby Heenan's protege. And Bobby Heenan, I hope you all agree with me on this, greatest manager of all time. No. To the point where if you take a look at my career, I never wanted to be called a manager. I didn't want to be compared to Bobby Heenan. Didn't want to be compared to Lou Albano. Didn't want to be compared to Freddie Blassie. And it's also, that's just my desire to ultimately have a role evolve and make it my own and be the first of anything that I do. But I also just didn't want to be compared to Bobby Heenan. Just didn't. So when I was in WCW, I was the CEO of the Dangerous Alliance. I wasn't the manager. When I was paired with Brock Lesnar in WWE for the first time, I was his agent. I wasn't his manager. And now, because I have the leverage to change what I'm called, I insist on being called an advocate. I'm not a manager. I'm an advocate. So I'm the first advocate, and hopefully in history I'll go down as the greatest advocate, but I know at least I'm the first. So Bobby Heenan was going to bring me on as his protege, and I would be like the executive vice president of the Heenan family or something like that, or stepfather of the Heenan family, whatever it could be. And eventually I'd screw Bobby Heenan out of the Heenan family and make it the Heyman family and turn Bobby Heenan babyface in WWE, give him a year run as a babyface, and then he'd go off to being a color commentator with Gorilla Monsoon, which was a great pairing. And I almost went for that job, but the person who was in charge of WCW at the time, Kip Fry, said to me, "Tell me what it takes to keep you. Name it. See if I'll blink." And I always wanted to be the first of doing something in this industry or in any other industry, but I always want to be the first. I want to break new ground. I want to do new things. I want to, hey, you know who started that? Heyman started that. Yeah, really? Yeah, he's the one that made it happen. He broke the barriers. He was the groundbreaker. He was the trendsetter. He changed the dynamic of the industry. So in one of the last deals cut, and not because the last deals, like they saw this deal cut, went, get this guy out of office. It just so happened it was one of the last deals that he cut. Kip Fry, K. Allen Fry, who was the head of WCW at the time, cut me a deal because I said to him, I'll stay if you make me an employee. Because wrestlers and managers and advocates and agents and everybody else are independent contractors. They have no employee rights. They have no pension plan. They have no medical. They have no benefits. They have no stock options. Nothing. You're an independent contractor. You're on your own. Come over to my house. Paint my house. Here's a day's rate. Have a nice day. And that's how it is. That's what an independent contractor is. And I said, I'm going to change the business. I want to be an employee. And I'm figuring, ain't no way this guy's going to make me an employee. Nobody's ever been an employee in this business. And he said, okay, I'll have the contract tomorrow. And he called my bluff on it. And I said, okay, if this guy gives me a contract to be an employee, how could I say no? How could I turn down being the guy that broke that barrier? And I was, and I did. And I broke that barrier, and that's the contract that they gave me. And that's why I turned down being Bobby Heenan's protege, because I was offered a chance in WCW to become the first performer, non-announcer, because announcers were signed to the corporate structure of Turner Broadcasting, but the first non-announcer to ever become an employee. So I stayed.